Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are diving into one of the most important books ever written, a work of history so huge and so ancient that it was on the verge of becoming completely unreadable. This is the story of the scholars who saved it for all of us, and it kicks off with one massive question. I mean, seriously, think about that. You have this brilliant book packed with incredible stories and information, but fast forward 2,000 years, who could possibly understand it? The language is totally different, the places aren't on any modern map, and all the people are long forgotten. So how do you keep that knowledge from just fading away? Well, our story revolves around this absolute monster of a book. It's called the Shiji, or the Records of the Grand Historian, and it was finished around 94 BC by a guy named Sima Qian. And his goal was, let's just say, ambitious. He didn't just want to write down some history, he wanted to write down all of it. A complete record of everything he thought had ever happened, from the legendary Yellow Emperor all the way up to his own time in the Han Dynasty. And the sheer scale of this thing is just mind-blowing. Sima Qian organized his history into 5 major sections, which kind of gives you this 3D view of the past. You had the annals, which followed the emperors. Then you had these incredible chronological tables, basically spreadsheets of history. Then treatises, which were deep dives on stuff like music, economics, you name it. Hereditary houses tracked the big noble families, and finally biographies, which told the stories of other important figures. We're talking 130 volumes covering more than 2,000 years. Nobody had ever tried anything like it. Okay, but here's the catch. It's one thing to create a masterpiece. It's a whole other thing to make sure people can actually read it hundreds of years down the line. Because, time has a way of creating a huge gap between the writer and the reader. Over the centuries, all these barriers just start piling up. A word that Sima Qian used might mean something completely different 500 years later. A city he mentions might not even exist anymore. He might reference some cultural ceremony or a government official that everybody knew back then, but is totally meaningless to us now. Without some help, the text just becomes a locked box. And this is where the real heroes of our story come in, the commentators. These were brilliant scholars who saw this incredible text slowly slipping into obscurity, and they decided to do something about it. They basically decided to build a bridge across time, connecting their world and ours all the way back to Sima Qian. The best way to think about it is like this. You know when you get a special edition Blu-ray of a movie? It comes with all the special features, the director's commentary, deleted scenes, explanations. That's exactly what these historical commentaries are. They're the glossaries, the maps, the expert analysis. All the stuff you need to actually unlock what's going on in the main text. And here's a perfect, simple example of how it works. In a section about canals, Sima Qian writes a really short phrase, "The bank often collapsed." Seems straightforward, right? But which bank? A river bank? A financial bank? A commentator comes along and adds one tiny crucial note. This refers to the bank of the Yellow River. And boom! All of a sudden, a vague sentence becomes a specific, vital piece of information. They do this thousands of times. Over the years, 3 of these commentators became so important that their notes basically got merged into the Shiji itself. You had Pei Yin, who was like the great collector, gathering up all the notes from even earlier scholars. Then there was Sima Qian, who was known as the gap filler. He actually wrote a whole new intro to cover the mythical emperors that Sima Qian had skipped. And finally, Zhang Shoji, who was the master of details. He figured out all the specific places and official job titles. The work of these 3 guys together is what makes the Shiji readable for us today. So let's see this in action. I want to show you a really fascinating story that would be almost impossible to figure out without these commentators. It's a story about glory, power, and how quickly it can all disappear, and it's hidden inside one of Sima Qian's super innovative data tables. Sima Qian created these tables to keep track of all the noble families that the first Han emperor set up. These were the generals and heroes who founded the dynasty, and they got rewarded with titles and land that were supposed to be passed down forever. So you see a guy like Cao Shen, and his family line keeps going. But then you look at Guan Ying and Zhou Bo. Their family lines got cut short, titles revoked. The table is just full of this kind of data, and it tells a story not just of reward, but of how fragile that reward really was. Let's just zoom in on one of these guys, Guan Ying. He was a war hero, a brilliant general. As a reward, he's made a marquis. His son inherits a title, no problem. Then his grandson, then his great-grandson. The family seems totally set. But then, just 56 years after he got the title, His great-great-grandson gets accused of a crime and is executed. And just like that, the House of Guan is gone forever. Their entire legacy just wiped off the map. And here's the crazy part. Guanyang's story wasn't the exception. It was pretty much the rule. Sima Qian's tables track over 100 of these original founding families. So after a century of politics, purges, and just bad luck, how many of those 100-plus noble houses were still around? The data tells a pretty shocking story. Only 5. Just 5. All the others had lost their titles one way or another. So what's the big takeaway here? I think it's that history isn't some static monument that we just, admire from a distance. It's really a living, breathing conversation that happens across centuries. When the first Han emperor gave these heroes their titles, this is the promise he made to them. It's this beautiful poetic promise of permanence, that their families would last as long as the mountains and rivers. But as Sima Qian's data shows us, and as the commentators help us truly understand, that promise was incredibly thin. Power and glory can vanish in the blink of an eye. And that is the absolute bottom line. Without scholars like Pei Yan, Sima Qian, and Shang Shouji, the Shiji would be this magnificent but totally silent ruin. They're the ones who gave it a voice again. They're the reason we can hear the echo of that promise of eternal glory and feel the sting of its failure. They make sure the wisdom and the warnings of the past are still here for us. And that kind of leaves you with one last thought, right? 2,000 years from now, when people look back at our time, what are they going to struggle with? What memes, what slang terms, what cultural references, what now defunct websites are going to need a commentator to explain them, just so our stories don't become a locked box too? It's a pretty wild thing to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.